Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new series similar to one that we've just started recording where Carter takes the lead. What a beautiful crack that was.
Almost
you.
like the crack Goku did to
This guy gets it. He's learning.
So it's all crack.
So yeah, that's a little teaser. In the way that Carter teaches me about football, I will be teaching him an equally useful source of information, and that will be information on anime. Because you know what? It's cool to be a weeb now. Back in the day, you'd get bullied for it, but now everybody's like, no, actually, I did watch Boba Bobo Boba Bo on Toonami at like 11 o'clock at night.
Yes.
And
Yes.
everybody thinks it's
anything
cool.
with that.
So, basically, each time we're going to take an anime series that I have seen, preferably, and I'm going to explain it to Carter. I might go through the kind of the plot of the story. I'll go through some background info on like the author or maybe stuff that happened in the manga, production things, which is definitely up Carter's alley as far as like shows and movies go.
Oh,
It's
yes.
just that, he hasn't really gotten into the anime world as much, but you are aware of stuff, I know you are. Right?
I like to think I am.
Yeah. Like, Spirited Away and like the usual
I love you
Miyazaki
invoke
type
the most,
things.
like you invoke the most like obvious anime of all time.
Am I
Not
wrong?
that I
though?
never shut up. Like you could have said, like you talk about Porco Rosso a weird amount,
Yeah, but
more than any human talks about Porco Rosso.
give the people an idea of like where you're at, It's a Miyazaki kind of guy. But we're gonna get into some of the more popular modern anime, some of the bigger ones back in the day, and even some, like less known ones that I still think are really good. And I will obviously give my opinion on whether or not I think they're worth watching. And huge spoiler warning, obviously, if I'm going to be talking about an anime, I'm going to be getting pretty into it. So if anybody wants to hear like a spoiler-free version, maybe we can try doing that. But yeah, that's basically the idea.
How would we
do that?
I don't know. I'll basically say like in the very beginning, I'll be like, "Here's the show. I really like it, or I really dislike it. Here's the general synopsis. There you go." And then I'll like get into it, something like that.
Yes. What I will say is I am into anime films as large. Like Calum said, I'm into the most white person anime movie of all time. But also, I tend to watch the big sort of prestige anime movies. Like, I've watched Belle, I've watched Weathering with You, I've seen, even sort of slightly more obscure stuff like The Night is Short, Walk on Girl. Like movies, I'm pretty into, but the series are where I'm just a haze. Where you can invoke names and I'll get them, but I generally don't know um, the broader scope or the stories. So
Yeah.
I thought this would be a good way to get me up to speed.
Yeah. And so I will do my best to explain things. And in today's episode, I'm just going to go over some background stuff. So we're going to talk about some terminology you would need to know to get into this kind of stuff, and it's just some general history of anime being popular in media. And so we'll get into it. So first of all, if you know nothing about anime, you might wonder, what is that word? Where does it come from? And anime is just the term for Japanese animation. So that's all it is. It's just animation, but coming from Japan. And so that's why things like Avatar don't really count as anime, because they're Korean. And there are a lot of really cool Korean stuff coming out, like show-wise. But I don't know what they call it. But yeah, and then
KTV?
so anime. Yeah, I guess this would just be a TV show. Um, what anime comes from, generally, there are some anime-only series, but a lot of times they come from manga. And manga is like what we would think of as like a comic book, basically. There's some more in-depth stuff. There's like light novels, which is like some drawings, but basically a book that gets adapted into anime. But generally, it is a comic book, and they read it from right to left, also, which is interesting. The author of a manga is known as a mangaka, which can be confusing.
That sounds like
it's a lot cooler
trying
than
not to
going
say
to
poop
book the
term.
author.
It does. But yeah, mangaka is the author, manga is the book, and then hopefully it gets adapted into an anime. And so I actually looked up, before we started this, Beginner's Guide to Essential Manga and Anime Terms, and what I find really funny is the majority of them refer to sexual things. So, like, these are all, like, uh, types of shows and mangas, and so, you know, not to stereotype, the Japanese love their dirty stuff, you know? So we have, obviously, the classic is hentai. Everybody knows what hentai is, I hope.
This is what you're opening with?
Yeah.
It's art.
It is art.
That's not canon. That's a deleted scene, Kevin. Sit down.
No.
So yeah, hentai is animated adult stuff, very explicit. And then you get to stuff that's less explicit that people really like. So there's one called Boys Love, or BL for short. And so that is generally stories about romantic or sexual relations between two men, you know. So popular example would be something like Yuri on Ice is a good boys love, or yaoi. Yaoi is also a term for man on man stuff. The female equivalent is called yuri. That would be lesbian stuff. You
I
have
think Calum's
dojinshi.
gonna convince me to not watch more.
No, it's fine. We'll get to other stuff. Dojinshi is a type of anime or comic that is fan made. So it's like fan made, self published kind of stuff about actual series. And for some reason, they're also very sexual a lot of the time. But it's basically like fan comics and things like that. Ecchi is a term that refers to like slightly erotic things, so not straight up like porn, but just like kind of sketchy. And then we'll get to probably more of the things that we'll be talking about on this show. So,
It's funny because
what?
you know what? Like, again, Nintendo started as an erotic card company. Like, they sold playing cards that had erotic images on them. And it's also just funny because I've been watching a lot of Robert Zemeckis films, and as someone described it, that dude is a horny son of a bitch. He's the kind of guy who would buy a magazine titled Jugs. And I feel like that describes what you just invoked here.
Yeah, I mean,
A culture filled with people who would buy magazines just titled Jugs.
It seems weird, right? But it is a big part of the culture, is this kind of like slightly erotic kind of thing. We might talk about that. Well, we probably will talk about that. It's such a classic trope in anime to have like the old perverted man, or sometimes not even old. There's just like some guy who's like really into women a little too much, and that's just part of the culture that you'll kind of have to accept. But to get into less adult stuff, we'll talk about some of the I'm trying to think of the word, not trope, genres. Some of the genres that we'll be talking about much more often than those other ones. So the one that you've probably heard of the most is shonen. So shonen anime.
Yes, I have heard that term.
And that term refers to shows that are geared towards younger, like, boys, like, teenage boys or younger. Which is funny because that's the majority of shows I watch. and I am not 18 years and younger. But that's just like, those are your shows where it's just a bunch of buff guys punching each other, action adventure, kind of like, you know, it's what teenage boys would like watching, and so that would be Dragon Ball, that would be One Piece, that would be the majority of the Cartoon Network animes that you would see. There is also Senin anime and manga, which is for slightly older groups, but pretty much along the same line as shonen. And so that would be like the Fate series, Ghost in the Shell. I think Vinland Saga is a Senin. So slightly older audiences for that, but same kind of idea.
Yeah, so it's like actiony, but you're allowed to show. Shoot, what was the term you used for manga authors?
Mangaka.
You're allowed. Yes, you're allowed. So it's still actiony and like robots and action and cool stuff, but you're allowed to show mangaka.
Yes. You're getting
Okay.
it.
I know some of these words.
And then the female version of these things would be shoujo. So that's stuff targeted towards girls, typically under 18. So that'd be like Sailor Moon.
Right.
And
which feels like the space I've inadvertently been in, just because like stuff like Steven Universe invokes that so much.
yeah, it would be that same kind of thing. And then the last one that I'm going to talk about, which is another classic genre, is isekai. So isekai is the genre of being transported to another world. So there are so many, and I mean so many anime, where you have the main character living a normal life who dies or gets teleported or
And accidentally
something.
becomes a slime.
Yes, that is multiple shows.
Probably.
So, you know,
Wait, multiple?
I feel like there should like the rule of isekai is like rule number like 85 or something.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's like if you think something could be an isekai, it probably is an isekai somewhere.
Yeah.
I will say isekai is weirdly there is a translatable element to American cinema. Early American films always felt the need to quantify their existence through something else. So here's an example. There's an early adaptation of Sweeney Todd where it's a barber telling the story of Sweeney Todd. They felt the need to be like, no, this is a guy telling the story of Sweeney Todd, but he's present day. Or, for example, in Singing in the Rain, the idea is the movie they're making is someone reads a Camelot book and falls asleep and imagines himself in that world. This idea that you always have to filter it through, a present-day, real-life person. So that's interesting.
Yeah, and so the interesting thing about isekai is, it's... I wouldn't say it's the antithesis to shonen, but it's isekai fans and shonen fans always kind of battle each other in that they're like, your show, all your shows are the same, the same kind of plot, and it's that could go either way. But both genres, every show is basically the same. But it feels like there's just so many isekai, and they're always coming out with new things, and they're trying to make it a little different, but it's still the same, average-looking, black-haired protagonist put into a new world, gets a harem of women, and is OP for some reason or another. And it's they try to switch it up, and it's he becomes a slime, he becomes a vending machine, he's a pharmacist.
Wait.
He is...
You can't go to pharmacist from vending machine.
What do you mean?
You know what?
Never
Yeah,
done
you're
that
right.
before?
Fuck me then.
Yeah.
You know what? Fuck me. You're right.
And so my favorite isekai, I will say, is Digimon. One of the classic isekai. Yeah. Because most people don't think about it, but that's an isekai. Because the kids get transported to another world full of digital monsters. and it's such a good series, and I'll probably talk about that another time. But yeah,
I did not know that. Okay, interesting.
yeah, because you can think about any anime where the character gets transported to another world. It's an isekai.
My brain
Um,
just defaulted to as a Pokemon thing where they just exist in a world where these things exist. Interesting.
you would think. But yeah, so those are the general things, and so I've seen quite a few anime. The majority of them being shonen, a few isekai, and a few others like slice of life. And slice of life is pretty explanatory genre.
Hmm.
It's just like people living their lives. Um,
Like
and
Whispers of the Heart.
yeah, and so the majority of the stuff we're going to talk about is shonen. And to talk about that, we'll introduce you to what is known as the Big Three. So the Big Three is the Big Three shonen anime. These are the three classic shonen anime from the 90s and early 2000s that every young boy and some women and others probably watched, that kind of sparked their journey into becoming a weeb, which is somebody who's really into anime and Japanese culture, also known as an otaku. Pretty much the same thing, but I think weeb is typically used more as an insult. But people don't really care anymore. They embrace the term weeb. Um, so the big three are One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach. And so there's a lot of debate between fans of the big three. That's going to be a common theme, is a lot of debating um, about like whose is the best, who is the best shonen series of the big three of them all. And it's tough to say because I've actually only seen two of them. I will be watching the third one soon. Because you have One Piece, which is close to the longest running anime series of all time. It is
What
not number
is the
one.
longest one?
Doraemon, which is a like kid show kind of cartoon anime that has been going since like the 60s or something.
Really?
Um, yeah, it's just like one-off kid show episodes that just has never ended. That is just constantly going. If that didn't exist, it'd be One Piece easily. Um, so One Piece is obviously a classic and still to this day still going on. The mangaka of One Piece, Eiichiro Oda, says he would like to finish in the next 5 years. He's been saying that for a while. Then you have Naruto, which actually did end.
Mm-hmm.
Not a typically common thing for big anime to do, but it did end. It has continued on with a new series about his son Boruto, but I think Naruto is arguably more recognizable than I think the other big three. I think it's
Hmm.
probably the most famous. I don't have the stats to back that up, but like you say Naruto and people know what you're talking about, you know?
I feel like I know more images from Naruto than I do One Piece. Like
Hmm.
all I know
Well,
from
he's
One
in
Piece
Fortnite now.
is
Yeah,
yes.
that's true.
Well, that helps. But yes, because I can believe it now. Because all I know
Believe
from
it.
One Piece stuff I saw from ads on Cartoon Network because I never watched the Adult Swim anime lineup.
Yeah. He fun fact about that, I'm pretty sure I've told you before. He says believe it in the dub because in the sub he says datebayo, which means nothing. It's just a nothing phrase, but it's just like his catchphrase, and so they needed something that would kind of match up with what
Huh.
he was saying. And so they said, well, let's just make him say believe it. Which is another thing in anime. A lot of times they'll just add on these like ending things to sentences that are just nothing words, that are just like a catchphrase, basically.
Yes.
That's super
Well, that
common in One Piece. You have characters that like have a catchphrase saying that they end their sentences with, and they also all have unique laughs.
Mm-hmm.
yes. I was going to ask, do you default to subs or dubs?
So I initially started with dubs because obviously I speak English. I do not speak Japanese, and I think some dubs are classics. I think there are some dubs that are so good that you just can't pass them up. And there are some moments in dubs where the voice actors really pop off. But dubs are always going to be at a disadvantage because they are never the first recording. You know, you have the original voice actors that typically the mangaka will like maybe not physically choose, but they'll be like, yeah, that's the voice I want for this character. And it's not always easy to make that work in English. And also, because of how voice acting works, when you're dubbing over something, the mouth movement isn't going to match up perfectly because it's made for a Japanese speaking audience or Japanese speaking voice actor. And so they have to change the words and phrases to match up with what they're saying. So it's not going to be a direct translation a lot of times. Um, and
There's
there's
also
debate.
the censorship too.
Yeah, there's also censorship in things that they might show in Japan, they're not going to show in the US, or things that they say and do. And there's, cases to be made for either they do the thing where they do the lip matching, where they just say something that's close but it matches up with the lip movement, or just straight up direct translation, but then you have that classic trope that people make fun of in old Japanese movies where the voices don't match up with the way the mouth is moving, and that's jarring. Um, and so I like a lot of dubs, but because dubs are also always behind the subs in their recording, if I'm like really into a show and I'm watching it weekly, um, and I just can't wait for the dub to come out, I'm just going to start watching the sub. And then you start to get used to the sub voices, and so it's like, it's up to you. I'm not going to argue one way or another about which is better
I
because
can't
I
read
enjoy
fast enough for
both.
the subbed.
That's fair. Yeah.
It's
Sometimes it is
we all
distracting to
know
be able
me
to
too.
read and watch.
Yeah. Well, that's always like, and I have been trying to learn Japanese, which was kind of one of the things that inspired this, because it's like, Carter, how are you this much of a weeb without actually watching anime regularly?
Exactly.
Um, and it always amuses me because Sydney defaults to dubs, so the couple of Japanese things we've watched will have the dub on, and it always amuses me seeing how much they have to change the text to make it work in audio form. Um, Presumably because the subtitles are more an accurate translation.
Hmm.
Um, I will say I do agree with you about the dub thing, where sometimes you get a dub that just really works. For me, the two examples are I want, well, three kind of, because I do like Michael Keaton as Parker Rosso, but the rest of the dub is kind of, I can take it or leave it.
Hmm.
Um, but my main two are Howl's Moving Castle.
Molly's
I,
favorite
I,
movie.
yeah, I really love Howl's Moving Castle, even though it's kind of like the forgotten Miyazaki. I just can't picture how with the Japanese voice actor. And the Japanese voice actor is good, but young Christian Bale is just so smoldering
Yeah.
um, in that
That's
role.
another thing is kind of nostalgia influences people. So,
Oh, absolutely. And Ponyo, and I think Ponyo works better because, like, it's quote unquote the more kiddie of Miyazaki's films. So I feel like the language is more universal enough that you don't lose too much from translation.
hmm, yeah,
But that's just from my perspective.
there's just some anime where the dub is just, you know, classic, and it's hard to forget. There's one that I'm really blanking on right now that is like a gangster type anime where the dub is just like perfection. It's
The
just so
Sopranos.
good the way they do the voices. No. And then there are some where the dub is just so comically bad, it's amazing. And the perfect example of that is the anime Ghost Stories, which I'm sure we'll do an episode on. It's just basically you had an anime, it was mid, and so they gave it to the dub people, and they're like, do whatever you want with this, we don't care. And the voice actors basically had free range. They had no script, they just talked, and it's so funny. Um,
Basically, any Sonic the Hedgehog game
yeah,
from like the early 2000s where the voice actors are like, yeah, we didn't really get any direction.
Yeah, if you ever watch it, you've probably seen clips of it in memes and thought it was just like made up, like for the meme, and no, that's the actual show. And so one or two last points for the big three because I feel like they're the most important to talk about. The last of it is Bleach. I would argue is the least popular of the big three, and I say that purely out of bias because it is the only one that I haven't seen. I will be watching it because famously Bleach was never finished, at least the anime, the manga was. They just like stopped making it, and so a lot of people were really upset by that because the other big three got to finish. Well, except for One Piece, but we'll see.
It's still out.
Um,
I
yeah,
remember there was some kind of like parody video that was like anime, and then there was a line that was like, except he doesn't watch Bleach because Bleach was bad, and that was like, finally, someone's saying what everyone's thinking, and
yeah.
that's all I know about Bleach.
I can't make too many opinions on it just because I haven't seen it, but I will see it because it is coming back actually in October. They're airing the final season.
Hmm.
So I'm going to watch it all the way through and see what I think. But I won't have nostalgia affecting me, which it definitely does for One Piece and Naruto. And the father of the big three, the granddaddy of shonen anime, which we must talk about, is Dragon Ball, of course.
Hmm.
People assume that Dragon Ball Z more specifically, is in the big three. It is not. It's like the predecessor. That kind of, I would argue, kind of birthed the shonen genre. That's not true. There are plenty of other older ones, but it's such a classic. And we will absolutely be going through all of those series because you've expressed interest since watching a couple episodes of Dragon Ball Super.
Hmm. Which
Um,
really was the inspiration for this, where I'm like, I'm engaged, and now I have questions.
hmm And I love getting people engaged in anime. Obviously, Kevin's been on his One Piece grind, which
Oh yeah,
I'm very happy to have influence over,
it's affected the
um,
wife too.
which is
Not
fantastic.
the wife.
I convinced Kenny Mac to watch Demon Slayer, which he's obsessed with now. Um, and so I just, I love influencing people. I'm an influencer, what can I say? So we'll definitely go over each and every Dragon Ball series, of which there is four, technically five, and I don't care about the fifth. So yeah, and if anybody at home has any interest in this, they want to hear me talk about a specific series, please, offer suggestions. I've seen a bunch, but obviously there are so many anime out there I can't have seen them all. So I'm going to go through as many as I can. Some are going to take longer than others. I would like to get through most of them in an episode, but that's just not going to be possible for a lot of things. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I'm very excited for this.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I this is a huge gap in my animation knowledge, and I'm excited to clean it up.
hmm And hopefully this will inspire you to watch a few of these shows.
Um, I'm pretty sure HBO Max has Crunchyroll, so I actually probably
It
could.
does, I think.
Yeah, so that would be great. There are some short ones you could definitely get through, and there's some longer ones that I think you definitely get sucked into. So, uh, in the next episode, what do you think? What do you want to talk about?
Hmm. My gut says I really want to get into this Dragon Ball. Like
I feel like we
I
gotta
just
start
got
with the
really,
granddaddy.
Got to start with the Dragon Ball. Yeah,
yeah.
I
I
think that's
need.
fair.
All right, good. I'm glad we're on the same page then.
hmm But we will obviously have to start with uh, the least remembered, or maybe second least remembered part of Dragon Ball, which is the original Dragon Ball, which is not as exciting. It's some people's favorites. Those people are like 40 years old. It is not mine, but I will still try to make it entertaining. And that's it.
Till next time, Kameyama, comment in the comment section and
Yeah.
let us know how we did. Nailed it.
Date
Let us.
Bayo.
I was gonna say, let us know what animes you want Calum to watch,
Yeah,
and
because
he'll
if you
explain
want
to
me
us.
to explain one and I haven't seen it, it just gives me an excuse to watch another anime. So
Yeah,
like
and we don't have
that's
to bend his arm about that.
yeah, that's homework I'm happy to do. And there we go. We will see you all next time where we start our Dragon Ball journey.